how can these families continue to honor these deaths by keeping the dreams of these children and teachers alive? Again, how can the loss of these lives matter? It seems that something is different. Uvalde, Texas is where I was born. Uvalde is where I learned responsible gun ownership. Now, Uvalde called me on May 24th when I learned the news of this devastating tragedy.
Actor and Uvalde native Matthew McConaughey making a passionate plea for gun control at the White House press briefing room today. Speaking to reporters about the victims of the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School after meeting with their families and calling on lawmakers to act.
We need to invest in mental health care. We need safer schools. We need to restrain sensationalized media coverage. We need to restore our family values. We need to restore our American values. And we need responsible gun ownership. Responsible gun ownership. We need background checks. We need to raise the minimum age to purchase an AR-15 rifle to 21. We need a waiting period for those rifles. We need red flag laws and consequences for those who abuse them. Responsible gun owners are fed up with the Second Amendment being abused and hijacked by some deranged individuals.
The actor also imploring Congress to find some middle ground.
We got to get some real courage and honor our immortal obligations instead of our party affiliations. Enough with the counterpunching. Enough of the invalidation of the other side. Let's come to the common table that represents the American people. Find a middle ground, the place where most of us Americans live anyway.
All right, Tulsi, what do you think the impact of Matthew McConaughey showing up to the briefing room will be, if anything?
Oh, first, I've gotten to know Matthew and his wife and family, and he's a sincere person. You know, he genuinely cares about our country, cares about the American people, and so I think this message was delivered in that spirit, and I hope it's received in that way as well. And I completely agree. We do have to come together as a country, and I think there is common ground that can be had, where I think we all want to make sure that criminals and those who shouldn't have their hands on guns don't, and that we do not in any way undermine our Second Amendment rights. Those law-abiding American citizens who own guns should not see their guns taken away.
Judge, do you think the things that he laid out just now, I think raising it to 21, getting rid of sensationalized media coverage, red flag laws, family values, do you think those are kind of a middle ground in the United States?
Absolutely. And I think it was delivered brilliantly. What he did was he had both the intellectual as well as the emotional pieces combined. He did it in a way, and I questioned what he was doing in the White House briefing room. I really did. But then I realized he did it better than anyone from Congress or certainly the President of the United States could do. And he presented things to make everyone feel that they were vested in this. And I think he embarrassed Congress when he said, you know what, there's no reason why we can't restore family values, American values, responsible gun ownership. He protected the Second Amendment. He recognized that mental health is an issue. He was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And by the way, when he talked about red flag, which is a difficult pill to swallow for a lot of people, he talked about consequences to those who abuse it. So if you claim someone is doing something and you're wrong, you do it out of viciousness, you need to be prosecuted.
Yeah, you could just drop a dime on someone you hated just to have them investigated and take their guns away.
I'm going to do that to you. First chance I get.
You would.
The first.
I'm a step ahead of you, though.
I know.
Somebody's waiting outside, Greg.
Yes. But the thing is, I did not see that as anything about gun control. I saw that as about the United States. I felt that he had stepped back, and it goes back to what we've been saying. You've heard all of those things here at this table about a multifaceted approach, but there's half of the country or half of the people, they don't listen to us because, of course, we're in our silos. And he has the benefit of being outside the silos. He's untethered to any ideology. You can't guess which way he's zigging or zagging half the time. And when he talks about middle ground, he's coming from a position of good faith. He's persuading as somebody who can appeal to both sides. I mean, he did the homework. He went out and actually talked to both sides, and a lot of people don't do that anymore. So I thought that was interesting, but it wasn't about gun control. He was showing how all of these things are kind of interconnected. And when he said those two things that, popped out to, when he said restrain sensational media coverage, okay, he's speaking my language because that's all I talk about, but it's combined with the restoring of family values. He's basically saying that, like, we're creating broken kids, right? And then they are being amplified by a broken media. And these things all come together. And he also talked about securing schools. That's another part of it. So I think, like, he is able to do something that, like, we could talk about this forever, and we're only speaking to the choir. He can bounce from church to church, and people pretty much go, oh, he's a movie star. He's a movie star. But he's not, he's rare in that he actually, like, he's not like a guy who tweets on Twitter or something when it happens, like, you can tell hopes and prayers to go to hell. He actually goes, does the homework. And that's why you can trust him, right? Yeah. See, the thing is, one thing he said when he said, and I'll shut up, he was talking about, it was a great twist. He was tired of the Second Amendment being hijacked by, like, madmen. That was a nice twist because you expected him to say, gun control freaks or right-wing extremists. He was talking about the madmen. That hadn't been done yet. But he didn't address the challenge, but it's in there that the other side looks at all gun owners the same. And that's what creates the mistrust. Yeah. That we're all painted as rednecks in the back of pickup trucks, trailing people around, vigilantes. What he was saying is, overwhelming majority of gun owners are responsible gun owners, and they're just as ticked either. Very clever, smart move. And the Republicans should take that, everything he said, build a bill, and beat the Democrats if you want to get political about it.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow he'll come out and do a press briefing on gas prices in the open border.
It's so interesting. Like, sometimes, I agree with everything that you've said. Sometimes you need a different messenger. And because all the things that are going to be said on this have been said. People are tuning out the president, even the press secretary, right? So it is like she couldn't deliver a message like that. But you mentioned how genuine he is, and so that authenticity comes through. And he's talking about his hometown.
Yeah. And
he knows those people. It's like when California first started going downhill. And it was like super personal to you. Like, you know that. And or like on the criminal justice system, or for you in the military, for me, like with ranchers and farmers.
Jesse and his hair.
I was trying to think of one for him, and
there isn't any.
But with I would say though with children, right? Yes. Like when you talk like so passionately about children, especially. So you have somebody who, in Matthew McConaughey, can come out and say, okay, here's my personal experience. And I was thinking of Peggy Noonan's piece on Saturday in the Wall Street Journal. The very end line, she said, I've never known a country so in need of a hero. I'm not saying that Matthew McConaughey is a hero, but it does make you realize that you need somebody who can say, all right, we know that there's a vast center. And we know that they feel like they are not being heard and they don't have a voice because there are extremes on both sides that are getting most of the media attention. So it's very interesting, and I think that the White House made a really good decision, either by inviting him or maybe accepting his request. Yeah. To come. I don't know how exactly that happened, but it was a good thing to do.
By the way, how did you meet Matthew McConaughey? What was that like?
It was great. I had dinner with him and his wife and kids, and it was really special. They were out in Hawaii, and wonderful family traditions. Everyone going around the table and saying, "What are you grateful for?" The kids, and they surf a lot. The kids love to surf, and so they spend a bit of time out in Hawaii. It was
Jesse,
great.
Please make note of how she says Hawaii. And
Hawaii.
Try to say that.
Okay. I was going to ask who paid.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.